What's going on, everyone? This is Nate the Great coming to you live from the All Sports All Plays Network. I am here today. I'm here today with two other guys that are out here on the West Coast. Joining us, making his second appearance on the show, we have the Angry Degenerate. How are you
Cheers,
doing
guys.
again?
Doing fantastic. Always doing great. Always doing great. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Now we also have Greg the Cake Galno. Um, he's going to be making an appearance here on making his regular appearance here on the show again. How are you doing as well?
I'm doing pretty good, Nate. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
Going right into the topics. Going right into the topics. If Mike, if you're watching, I'm gonna say something. I said this before, and you laughed at me for saying this, but I honestly think that Andy Dalton had a better performance in the game against the Buffalo Bills than Justin Fields. And it was Facebook comment to the Touchdown Club, and he put the laugh reaction to it. Now he's a Chicago Bears fan, but being a 49ers fan and being a Colts fan, how do you guys feel about that? Do you guys agree with that?
That Andy Dalton looked better than Justin Fields this past week.
Yeah, against the Bills.
Well, I mean, it's hard to. Justin Fields took a really bad hit, a really bad unnecessary hit. I think he holds the ball way too long. The Bear. I think when you're looking at. If you don't want him to get killed behind that terrible offensive line with the Bears, I think you might want to start off the season with Andy Dalton. How many games? well, we'll see how the record goes, right? Because let's be honest here, Matt Nagy possibly on the hot seat. Ryan Pace, general manager, definitely on the hot seat. If they start the season off 1-2, 1-3, the fan base is out there in Chicago at Soldier Field. They're going to be calling for Justin Fields to be out there on the field, and the head coach Matt Nagy is going to have to make that decision. But in terms of this game, I'll give you that one. I think he looked a little bit better.
Now, I'm going to say something. Again, it's not going to be very popular among Chicago Bears fans. But I would start Justin Fields in the middle of the season for two reasons. If one of these two scenarios come down. One, if Chicago Bears win 2 games, only win 2 games out of the first 9. Maybe I'll maybe go 3 or 4. But if you go 5-7, I'm sorry, not 5-7, 5-2. 5-4 or higher. If you have a winning record, then no, I wouldn't do that.
Well, I mean, you look at their upcoming schedule here. Their first game is at home, away against the Rams. That's going to be a tough game.
Yeah, that's a loss.
Then they play at home against the Bengals. You got to think that's going to be a win.
Yeah, that's going to be a win. 1-1.
Then they play at the Browns. I would characterize that as a loss. Then they play the Lions. That's hopefully a win, right? So you got them at 2-2 through 4 games. Then you have them at the Raiders, which can be a toss-up game, I'd say, because they do have to travel out there to the West Coast, and then they have against the Packers following week, and then they have the Buccaneers, and then they have the 49ers. So, which is very interesting, that game against the 49ers.
First 8 games that you mentioned, I would go 4-4.
Yeah, so if they go 4-4, what do you do? Do you stay with Andy Dalton? Do you continue with or do you go with Justin Fields to couple that with the 49ers possibly having Trey Lance?
Now, there is one other thing that I would start Justin Fields for. And that is if you are first in your... Now, this is not going to happen. Trust me, this won't happen. But that is if you're first in the NFC and you're ahead by 2 or 3 games. I would start Justin Fields maybe for a quarter and see how well he does.
Just randomly put him out there?
Yeah. Just to see how he does it in the future.
That's a different thing. That's different than what's normally done in football.
Yeah.
I guess the only comparison that I could think of is when the Dolphins last year would pull Tua and bring in the closer Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can kind of think of that was very similar. Or maybe, sometimes they put in Taysom Hill there with the New Orleans Saints to spell Drew Brees, but it's usually just for gadget plays. But that's an interesting take, Nate.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. Now, Greg, we haven't had much of your opinion on this. What cases would you start Justin Fields if you're not starting him in week 1? They have the rough schedule on the road. We already decided. I decided that I think that they're going to go 4-4. What are your opinions on the Bears this season? Where would you start Justin Fields?
Well, I think that the first thing I would do when it comes to Justin Fields is we all know that Ryan Pace didn't make the move for Justin Fields for him to sit for an extremely long time. But I think that they got Andy Dalton in there first, and then Justin Fields came later. But, where Justin Fields fell in the draft and then Ryan Pace made the move to get him, he's the heir apparent. He's going to take over the franchise at some point. I think that they're really hoping that maybe Andy Dalton can be that bridge quarterback to maybe buy Justin Fields a year or maybe 3/4 of a season to kind of sit and learn and everything. Because from what I watched of the game, we're talking about Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. We saw some great play from former quarterback Mitch Trubisky in that game. He really tore his former team up in that game. I know he's not going to start.
Good for him.
I know he's not going to start, but he's in a great position on a great team right now behind Jared Allen. He's going to be one of the best backups in the league, and I'm happy for Mr. Trubisky to kind of move on from that situation. But talking about Andy Dalton,
I just realized you said Jared Allen.
Well, what's his name?
Josh Allen.
Oh, Josh Allen. Okay. Well, Josh Allen. Well, Mr. Trubisky's in a great situation over there. But getting back to Andy Dalton, I think that the Bears are really hoping that he can buy them at least half a season for Justin Fields. What I saw from the Bears game, and I know it's a preseason game and everything, but the Bears just got taken to lunch. They just got their butts handed to them on the offensive line. The Bills came out, their defense just worked that offensive line over. And I definitely don't think that Ryan Pace and company want to really put Justin Fields in too much harm's way right now with that line not being solidified. So I think that Andy Dalton does a pretty good job at not holding the ball terribly long. And I think that if they can get to 4-4 or 3-5, 4-4 around the midway point, they may look at trying to get Fields in there, but I definitely don't see the Bears making much of a run for the playoffs. So I think they're going to try to buy as much time for Justin Fields to learn and really get acclimated to his new position, as being the future leader of the Bears. So I think that they may give Dalton a whole season. I don't know how you guys feel, but I think that some of these quarterbacks coming in, it would serve them better to maybe, sit out, have a season or more before they get thrust into the limelight.
I personally don't think that Andy Dalton will play the full season for one of two reasons. One, he's either going to be shellacked behind that offensive line, which you pointed to. Look at the problems with that offensive line. Their starting left tackle, who's coming into camp, their second-round pick, starting left tackle, out for the year with a back injury. They have to bring back Jason Peters out of the doldrums to start. 39-year-old Jason Peters is going to be their starting left tackle. He just signed last week. And they got rid of they let Charles Leno go this past offseason, which I thought was a very interesting move to say the least, because he was a pretty reliable offensive lineman for them. Now, you saw this game this past week. Justin Fields running for his life. Now, I do think Andy Dalton gets the ball out a little bit quicker than Fields. I think Fields has the tendency to hold on to the ball a little bit longer.
But he is going to take some big hits.
He's going to take some big hits, but he's mobile, right? And Andy Dalton is sure as hell ain't mobile, man. We saw what happened last year with the Dallas Cowboys. We saw he got knocked into smithereens. And man.
I would say that from what I've seen from the Bears, they do have some pretty good running backs. But if you don't have a great line, you can't protect your quarterback that way because the running backs aren't going to get you enough yardage, you know? So it's kind of a lose-lose situation right now with the Bears. They did have some pretty good running back play, but they don't have anybody to really block for them that well.
Here's another idea. You know, you're facing up week 1 against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I know he has not played a regular season yet, but let's say you're playing against, you know, teams that do not have a strong defense, like the Titans. You know, let's say, you know, you start Andy Dalton there. But guys, because Andy Dalton is not a mobile quarterback, like, you know, we talked about earlier, what about you start Andy Dalton there, but you start Justin Fields against teams that have a stronger defense, like the Rams in week 1? Now, the one downside is that's week 1. He has not had a regular season experience in the NFL yet. But that's just an idea that they're out there.
I mean, that never really happens in the NFL. So I think I don't know if Matt Nagy wants to be the test dummy for this experiment that you're proposing, considering his job may be on the line and Ryan Pace's job might be on the line. But it's a very interesting conversation because, I mean, last year, like I said, we did see what happened with Tua, struggled a couple games. They pulled him. I don't know if that caused some confidence issues. I don't know because I'm not in the brain of Tua Tagovailoa, but I just think that what you're proposing, there's a reason why possibly it hasn't happened. I just don't think you tinker with quarterbacks like that.
I sometimes look at that trade between the Bears and the Raiders and kind of put a big what if on it, because you're looking at Khalil Mack and he's pretty much wasting away in Chicago. He's racking up great numbers, but he's wasting his talent. He's pretty much the NFL's Mike Trout, you know, over there right now. He's not going to get a whiff of much playoffs and everything. He's an outstanding player. But then you look at what happened to the Raiders. I don't think they really got much to show for it out of all the first round picks that they got out of it either. So I'm kind of wondering what would have happened, who the Bears would have picked, you know, in those drafts had they not went after Khalil Mack, because I'm not seeing anything for the Raiders, and I'm just wondering if the Bears would be better off if they wouldn't have went and got Khalil Mack, at least from an offensive standpoint, because right now they don't seem to have a lot to work with other than an above average defense.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing as soon as you talked about the Raiders trade, because I read earlier today that back in March, the Raiders tried to get Khalil Mack back.
Yeah, John Gruden's a fucking moron. But that's a conversation for another day. I mean, just think about this scenario. One of his first moves as the Raiders head coach was to trade Khalil Mack, and he made a point of it from the beginning, and now he suddenly wants him back. That to me just shows what's going on in that Raiders front office. But to your point, I mean, in terms of Khalil Mack, the Bears gave him $90 million in guaranteed money. That is a shit ton. That is an exorbitant amount.
It worked out great for him, but what I'm saying is, you look at all the questionable draft picks that the Raiders got out of it. I mean, they don't really. I mean, it seemed like a steal for the Raiders, you know, getting all those first round picks in a row, you know, and it left the Bears with nothing in the first round for several years. But I think even after all that, I think the Bears still got the better end of the deal. I just don't think that the Bears have done anything from an offensive standpoint to really help out their cause. They just I personally, if we're talking about Justin Fields, I don't think that I would put him out there for quite some time because I just don't think that they quite have enough, either from an offensive line or from a wide receiver or even running back standpoint to really protect him out there.
So we do have a couple of comments. Some I will address later on in the show. But let's go ahead and move on to the next topic, which another quarterback controversy, has to be Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. That's the next topic that we have. And John Suggs, he has a comment that he likes to address, and he says, do you start Trey Lance? He looked good in their first two games, but that should be easy wins against the Lions and the Eagles.
That's exactly why you start Jimmy Garoppolo. I think. I mean, I don't know if, and I'm not quite sure that starting Trey Lance is gonna be. I follow the 49ers pretty closely, and I don't think Trey Lance has done enough to win the job from Jimmy Garoppolo as of yet. We'll see what happens against the Raiders. He has looked good per se, but if you look at the people he's playing against, I mean, maybe anybody could look good against those guys. I mean, he was playing a bunch of no names this past week against the Chargers. He struggled the first 2 or 3 drives. Then he, a little bit resilient, came back, and he, had 2 touchdowns, 1 interception to finish the game. I think his problem is he just has a freaking heater, man. He throws the ball at 100 miles an hour, has no damn touch on the ball, and I think he needs to kind of learn that concept of the game at this moment. And he also gets a little bit of happy feet, which, I mean, doesn't surprise me because he's literally playing behind a makeshift offensive line there in San Francisco at the moment. They had nobody that's in their starting 5 on the offensive line playing. Actually, that's incorrect. They had Laken Tomlinson playing. But other than that, everybody else was backups that were playing. So it's really hard to gauge. I'm not going to say that Jimmy has looked good in preseason because he has not. But I just don't think Trey has done enough yet to win the job. Will he play this year? I absolutely do think so because Jimmy's going to get injured at some point in time. I just looking at his injury history, it's bound to happen.
To answer that question, we talked a little bit about this last week too. Last week he had one good throw that was an 80-yard touchdown pass against the Kansas City Chiefs. But outside of that, he pretty much did nothing. You're talking about one good throw that's for 80 yards, and his total completion attempts and yardage was 5 out of 14. 5 of those were completed out of 14 passes. And you're talking about for 128 yards, 128 minus 80. You're talking about a good 40-ish yards. And divide that by the number of completions. You're talking about 10 yards per per those 4 completions, which that's not bad. But the point is, he did not throw a lot of complete passes in that game. And now going into the game against the Chargers, which started off with Chargers having an early lead, even though the 49ers did catch up and win it at the end, towards the third quarter. Trey Lance did a little bit better, but you're talking 8 of 14 with 102 yards and 2 touchdowns, as you covered earlier.
He also had an interception that was more on the receiver. On Ayuk, he dropped the ball. I mean, I guess you could say Trey kind of overthrew him a little bit. Similar actually kind of to what Jimmy did earlier in the game. They kind of threw the same route, and they both overthrew their receiver. And, they kind of popped it up in the air. And funny, Asante Samuel Jr. actually made one of the picks, which I I was hoping the 49ers would have drafted in the second round, but instead they went with slow-footed Aaron Banks at guard, which, by the way, got injured in the first game against Kansas City. And anytime you see a second-round pick that you hope to start and he's already injured, not a good sign. Not a good sign.
Yeah, I'm honestly agreeing with you because I think that the only way that Trey Lance would get started is if Garoppolo gets hurt, and unless they have it he has the Super Bowl season like he did 2 years ago, which I don't think that's gonna happen.
I will say this: the only way Trey Lance starts Week 1 is if he goes out there against the Oakland Raiders and has I remember a few years back when Derek Carr was fighting for the quarterback job against Matt Schaub, his rookie season. This is a long time ago, actually. This is about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And he went out there and lit it up in preseason in the final game, and they just gave the job to him. Russell Wilson did something very similar, too, when he was fighting against the job against Matt Flynn.
Yeah.
And unless Trey does something like that, I don't see him starting Week 1 against who do the 49ers play?
Or Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt.
Or Jimmy gets hurt, but I mean, preseason, it's not going to happen.
Moving on to the next topic, actually.
You guys didn't let me talk about it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. You go ahead and then.
Well, I'm going to keep this short and sweet about this, but I think you guys know where I stand over the last few weeks talking about this. I'm a firm believer that when you've got a quarterback that you draft highly, if you have decent enough talent in front of that quarterback, I think it's best if you can buy some time for that quarterback to learn from a veteran or, carry the clipboard and kind of learn a little bit. If you can spare the time, and not have to throw someone into the fire as quickly. So I think that when it comes to a Mac Jones or a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance, I think that they're going to be better served kind of sitting out some games, sitting out half a season or so and kind of learning from whoever they're playing behind. Jimmy G's not a terrible quarterback. He helped get them to a Super Bowl a few years ago. He's a capable quarterback. He learned behind Tom Brady, one of the best in the business. So I think that unless a team really has to put, their top rated quarterback, their top draft pick, first round quarterback in there, I think that it's better to sit them out. So I think that right now at this point, Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence are the only two that I see that probably should be out there because they're far above anybody else on their teams, talking about the Jets and the Jags. But I think that there's the competition is fairly even in a few of these other battles. So I think that it'd be best for a Trey Lance to maybe sit. And then like the Angry Degenerate said, if Jimmy G's not getting the job done, then give Trey Lance a chance and see what he can do. So I don't think that Trey Lance has necessarily won the game one start at this point. I think that it'd be best if he kind of sits it out just few games, and see if Jimmy G. I mean, the 49ers are loaded on both sides of the ball. They got plenty of talent. So I don't think it's going to take a whole lot. You're not going to need a Peyton Manning or somebody to try to win games for the 49ers. They got an excellent defense. They got a lot of offensive tools. So I think that a Jimmy G can carry the load and they'll get wins, regardless of who's there. So I think it'd be better for Trey Lance to just kind of learn a little bit from Jimmy G and then get inserted later on in the season.
John Suggs, he mentioned a comment, actually, and I'm just going to keep this short and simple. He says, 221 yards Trubisky did against the Bears. So was it the Bears the reason why he didn't succeed? And to answer that question, it wasn't the Bears team. It was the coach. I thought it was just the coach. The coaching system that he was in, I didn't think really worked out for him. But to get more information, that's just my hypothesis.
Well, that's what Mike said That's what Mike said last week. It's not necessarily that Matt Nagy's a bad coach. It's just that he's a system coach. And if you don't fit in particularly to that system, then you're not going to do well.
Mm-hmm. I think people forget Matt Nagy's been in his what is it now? He's going on his 4th year. He's been to the postseason now twice. He's been to the postseason now twice with that Chicago Bears team. I think we often forget that because double doink Cody Parkey, and then obviously last season they kind of got in there last minute because Arizona shat the bed. But
yeah, Nagy's not a bad coach, and he's coached some great quarterbacks. It's just I don't think they've had the greatest luck, somewhat with their coordinators on both sides of the ball over the past few years either. They've been going through some coaches the past few seasons too. So lack of stability in the coaching staff kind of hurts a lot too.
Yeah, but I think really we're going to. I feel like to answer that question, John, we're going to have to see more. When they play their game against the, I believe next week they play the Raiders.
The 49ers play the Raiders next weekend.
Oh, the 49ers play the Raiders. That means the Bears actually play the Tennessee Titans. So I feel like, what are we going to see from the Tennessee Titans? We'll actually get an answer on that question. But, speaking of needing to see more, trying to get an answer towards that question, I'm going to go change the banner real quick and go back to what I originally had. The Saints ended up pulling the win, but it was close. It was not what I expected, to be honest. CJ Beathard, he ended up being the one guy to score a couple of touchdowns at the end to make it a close game. The Saints ended up pulling the win. Now, I'm going to have to tease about the entire NFC about something because this is now the 5th win from the NFC period in the preseason. Now that goes to a record of 5-28.
You might be the only one tabulating that. I mean, can we do wins and losses in preseason really matter, folks?
No. No, but it is still embarrassing if it was a regular season. If it was regular season.
Give the Ravens a Super Bowl for winning 25 straight preseason wins or whatever the hell that statistic was that I read the other day.
Yeah.
You gotta understand something about Nate, though, Mike. He's a stat master. That was one of his nicknames, was the stat master. Nate was on the show a few months ago saying that they need to have a hockey award based on who wins the most face-offs during the hockey season. So I think that'd be interesting because they got an award for everything else. In hockey.
I would like to see a hockey award for most ass beatings happening. I mean, who beats up the most dudes? That would be a cool award.
I'm gonna say one more thing, and then we'll get right into the topic. Don't drag this, but the Detroit Lions have won one playoff game since 1957. Just to show you how much I pay attention to stats. Since 1957.
Yeah. Is that the last time they won the Super Bowl or the NFL championship or something? Was in the 50s or something?
So, to tell you the truth, to be honest, no, 91. That was their one playoff win since 57. And in 57, they beat the Browns. They destroyed the Browns that year. It was like 53-7, I believe. And then 91, they ended up beating the Dallas Cowboys. I don't remember the score, but then they lose to Washington the next week.
Was that Barry Sanders' rookie year or something?
Mm-hmm. Barry Sanders played in that game, but I don't remember if it was his rookie year.
I think his rookie year might have been, 88, 89? I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on it.
Yeah. Talk about a guy that made the most out of crappy talent behind him, you know what?
Yeah. Going in the comment section, the very first comment, actually, Jameis Winston did really well tonight, is what he said. And yeah, I think so as well. The Ravens the Ravens. That ended up being his next comment actually. Jameis Winston had a total of 9. Out of 10 passes he threw them for 9 of them were complete with 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. I didn't really actually see the game. However, I thought, as a stat standpoint, I thought he did really well scoring those 2 touchdowns. And those 2 touchdowns, I did see photos of that were pretty impressive as well. Did either one of you two catch the game?
I did not.
No, but I still think that Jameis Winston is going to be the man in New Orleans. I think that he's the best at the quarterback position. I think that Taysom Hill will definitely get some run, in each game. He'll get some special teams work. He'll catch the ball out of the backfield or whatever they need him to do. But I think that Jameis Winston's probably the best pure quarterback that they got right now.
And
I think so too.
Yeah, I think so as well. Now, going on the opposite side of Trevor Lawrence, he threw 113 yards, 14 completions at 23 attempts. They just couldn't put any points on the board. Neither Trevor Lawrence or Gardner Minshew, who did have some starting experience in the NFL. They just couldn't. I feel like they just couldn't get over the hump. I believe, And one other thing, James Robinson didn't have a great game as well. 5 carries, 13 yards. And he averaged about a 2.6 each carry that he had. It just, do you think, this may be a bad way of saying it, but do you think James Robinson, if he continues to go down like what he had today, do you think it might be like a one-hit wonder kind of thing?
Well, I mean, they're pretty stacked at that running back room. I mean, you look at James Robinson, they have Travis Etienne, and they also have Carlos Hyde. So, I mean, you rank them up there 1, 2, and 3. It's a pretty solid core there. I mean, I would think when you draft a running back in the first round, he would tend to get a lot of carries. So I'm assuming Travis Etienne is probably going to play a lot. I know that there was some rumblings that he's going to be a pseudo running back wide receiver in camp. There's been a lot of weird things going in that, Jacksonville Jaguars camp with the whole Tebow signing. Then they had Travis Etienne. They talked about moving positions, and then they had a former first round pick that they wanted to trade. And then they have this whole thing where it's like they're not really naming a starting quarterback yet. And it's like, come on, guys. It's Trevor Lawrence. You're not going to put Gardner Minshew out there week 1. Sometimes I feel like Urban Meyer seems a little bit over his head. But I don't know.
I only think they're not going to put Gardner Minshew in week 1 because
you cannot put him at week 1. You cannot start him. You cannot start him.
What I'm saying is, if he had played in the NFL, had starting experiences, if he played for, let's say, the number of years that Andy Dalton has played, then I would start him week 1. But he's only played for 3. So that's why I think Trevor Lawrence should start.
I think Trevor Lawrence should start because he's the number 1 overall pick and is way better than Gardner Minshew, bar none. Even coming into the league this year, Gardner Minshew is the perfect stereotypical perfect backup quarterback. He can be in the NFL for 10 to 15 years collecting a paycheck like Chase Daniel and have a great life. And he can have a great life, but please do not put him anywhere near a starting quarterback position. I mean, we've seen him already. We've seen he's not very good. I mean, he's about average which is not what you want at the starting quarterback position. And if you're going to go out there and draft a once in a lifetime talent like Trevor Lawrence, you're not sitting him. And if they do, they're going to. I mean, Jacksonville itself is already Siberia. Nobody cares about the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if you're gonna put Gardner Minshew as starting quarterback, people are gonna care about you less. So at least put in Trevor Lawrence while he has a cheap contract.
Okay, yes, but even starting NFL, even number 1 overall picks. This is what last thing I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna give this to Greg actually. Even starting NFL quarterbacks do need veteran protection. Even though Gardner Minshew's played it for a couple of years. I don't really consider him a veteran. But Greg, I'll give this to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me ask you guys a question. Whose jerseys do you think are selling out more in Jacksonville? Trevor Lawrence's or Gardner Minshew jerseys?
Very good point. Very good point.
But not just from a financial standpoint. I think that Trevor Lawrence is kind of right up there. When you look at some of the great number 1 overall draft picks, as far as how high rated he is coming in, he's right up there. He's not quite at the level of a Peyton Manning, but he's right up there as far as a can't miss pick. So I think that you pretty much have to start him. I think that his talent is far superior to what Gardner Minshew can bring to the table, and there's a lot of hype in Jacksonville over getting him and the great success that he had at Clemson, and all the numbers that he put up and everything. And he's got great size. He's 6'6", about 240 pounds. So he can take some hits, and he's pretty mobile, and he's got a big arm, and he's got a great heart and love for the game. So I think that he is going to be the game 1 starter, and I think that he's going to be the starter for years to come. One thing about Peyton Manning, when he came in, he was the day 1, snap 1 starter, and it's not like the Colts took the world by storm that year either. They took some knocks. I think they only won 1 or 2 games Peyton's first season. Took a lot of hard
they won 3 games that year.
He threw a lot of interceptions, but he put up a lot of yards too. But I mean, it was a work in progress, Just because sometimes you get the number 1 quarterback doesn't mean that you're gonna go to the playoffs the following year. Sometimes you have to keep building, just like the Dallas Cowboys did. Back in the 80s, they had to get Emmitt Smith, they had to get Michael Irvin. They had to keep building. You can't just invest everything into quarterback. So I think that the Jags are a few years away from making any big waves, but I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to be their day 1, and I think that he's going to be their head starter, their starting quarterback for years to come.
But
so
you look at
Gardner, but he's not going to do it.
Gardner Minshew. Go ahead. Sorry.
But you look at the teams that made the playoffs last year. You look at Tom Brady. He didn't start until the Super Bowl. You look at, he didn't start his first season until the Super Bowl against the Rams. You look at Patrick Mahomes. He got rested. He rested his first year. You look at Baker Mayfield.
Tom Brady came in for an injured Drew Bledsoe. That's how Brady got the.
And he was a 6th-round pick.
I get it. He was a 6th-round pick, but that still proves my point that even it doesn't matter what part of the draft that you're in. I think you need to be arrested underneath a guy with a veteran leadership that can start for a good chunk of time.
I disagree with that point. I think it absolutely matters where you're drafted because if a 6th-round pick is starting at quarterback day 1, your quarterback room is pretty pathetic, to be honest with you. And especially if we're talking about Tom Brady, Drew Bledsoe at that point in time was a pretty well-establised quarterback. He lost to a great Brett Favre.
But it's kind of hit and miss when you're talking about top draft picks, and them starting the season, because for every Peyton Manning out there, there's always a Jeff George story. I mean, look at those careers. They were both
Ryan Leaf,
top picks.
Ryan Leaf,
Jamarcus Russell. But I mean, each and every one of those guys have different stories, right? I mean, Jamarcus Russell seemingly was a guy that just kind of got too involved with the purple drink, if you know what I mean, and guys like. But then you have great success stories. Patrick Mahomes, he sat one year, right? But that's because he was behind a great Kansas City Chiefs team. They didn't need him to start that year. They had Alex Smith. So a lot of these teams that are drafting this high, they don't have an Alex Smith that's there waiting to who's there in a team that's primed to win. A lot of these teams are like the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have nobody behind them that's good enough. I mean, Gardner Minshew was 1-7 last year. That's going to bring zero confidence.
The two best quarterbacks that I've ever seen that were backups that ended up having to sit it out for a while, and they've ended up having legendary careers, was Steve Young when he sat behind Joe Montana for a few years before they moved on and he moved on to the Chiefs, and Aaron Rodgers for sitting out a few years behind Brett Favre. So.
But remember, Steve Young was with Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay was terrible.
Yeah, but he was a great backup quarterback behind Joe Montana, and he was so good. It was kind of like a Tony Romo situation. He was so good that it was like, well, Joe's got us 4 Super Bowls, but we got to move on. Somebody's got to go, and it ended up being Joe Montana.
So. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's talk a little bit about Dallas. My former hometown, not my hometown anymore, not the town that I live in right now, but Dak Prescott. There was a report that came in that he's not going to be 100% healthy throughout the entire season. Does that obviously that hurts Dallas's chances? But I guess, what I'm trying to ask is if you were the Dallas Cowboys head coach, would you want to I know you have concerns, but is it enough that you would not start him week 1? And I guess I'll go with Greg first, since
to not start Dak Prescott for the first game of the season?
I know the backup quarterback room is terrible. I get it, but
Benny DiNucci,
you need to be. I get it, but health is more important than team success any day. That's.
Well, I would say, considering the fact that Dak Prescott signed a huge contract even after that crazy leg break that he suffered against the Giants last season, and then to get, a huge contract extension after that, I think that regardless of who they're playing, who are they playing week 1, Nate?
I'll double check, but I think, never mind, it's Tampa Bay.
Thursday night football. Thursday night.
Okay. Well, I think that was going to be a big L, regardless of who starts under center for
Dak
the Cowboys.
So if Dak was healthy, I still think the Cowboys would lose, but I don't think it would be a big blowout.
Yeah, it might be competitive, but I think that when you're talking about a guy that's going to make $40 million, per season, and then that break that 20 years ago would have ended somebody's career. I mean, that leg break that he had was absolutely horrific. So the fact that he might not be ready or not be 100%, I think that I would take precautions and maybe give the backup a game 1 start just to be safe, because you're talking about a $40 million a year quarterback now. I don't think that he was worth the $40 million a year. I think that he's a decent quarterback, but since they are invested that heavily, I think that I might take his health a little bit more seriously and let him rest a game or so.
And John, I see your comment. Cooper Rush will be the number 2 quarterback. It still doesn't matter. Both guys are all those guys.
It'll be the pizza man. It'll be DiNucci's Pizzeria, the pizza man. He'll be the number 2 guy. Jesus.
I just think that when you're talking, I don't know how you guys feel about the economics and stuff, but when you got a guy that you're paying $40 million, whether they're worth it or not, I think that you got to take the precautions, because the last thing you want is another serious setback.
Can you imagine Jerry Jones if Mike McCarthy tells Jerry Jones, "Hey, I'm gonna sit him down week 1"? Jerry Jones's face might actually move. It's not happening. Dak's gonna play week 1, but the more concerning thing to me is, okay, so he's not going to be 100% to start the season. We already know that players, as the season goes on, they're not going to be 100%, but they're usually quite 100% when the season starts. The fact that he's not going to be 100%, and the fact that he's not going to be 100% because of a shoulder injury that we still don't know how it happened, that's a little weird to me. It doesn't pass the smell test here, because they had to ask Major League Baseball teams for advice on what to do with his shoulder. And we all know, if you're a baseball fan, you all know shoulder injuries linger, especially on your throwing shoulder. We saw what happened with Jacob deGrom this year with the New York Mets. It lingers, and you're going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL with a shoulder injury that's going to linger all season. You might as well be Cam Newton then.
Yeah, and look at what happened to Drew Brees last year. Look at what happened to Drew Brees. We found out that he had like torn biceps and all kinds of stuff going on in his throwing arm, and nobody knew about it. They kept all that stuff a secret. He had tons of pain going on in his arm, and he played very, very poorly in the playoffs. And I commend people for wanting to play hurt. Back in the day, when there wasn't near as much money circulating around the NFL, a lot of players kept their injuries and everything to themselves, because you either played or you didn't get paid. So it's a little bit different now.
No, if I was Roger Goodell, I'd be concerned, because the fact that NFL has said it, so Dallas will be playing opening night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defending Super Bowl champions. And Dak might not be starting that game. I feel like, even though that Dallas is the America's team, most popular team, I should say, that not most winning team, but most popular team, even though that is the case, I don't think that I feel like revenue might be a little bit. You would have had better luck if you started. I feel like you would have had better luck if you started, say Tampa Bay did New Orleans week 1 or something like that.
Well, this game's going to be on national TV. This game's going to be on NBC. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more people than just Jerry Jones, worried about whether Dak's going to be out there or not. You're talking about a big money game, and I don't think that NBC is going to get near as many viewers if DiNucci or Cooper Rush or somebody out there is throwing the ball around the field for the Cowboys. So, there is probably a lot of money at stake. NBC lost a ton of money on the Olympics. I think they're hoping that Sunday Night Football can help them get a little bit of that money back. But I don't know. I'm all about trying to protect players, because one bad injury could ruin somebody's career. And like Mike's saying, these shoulder injuries. Look at Jacob deGrom. He was absolutely unhittable for the first 15 starts or so of the season, and now he's not even. I mean, the Mets are on a slide. He's nowhere to be found. I mean, it's just it's devastating when you're talking about these kind of lingering issues and stuff, whether it's a rotator cuff, bicep issue, whatever you got going on. So I don't know. I would take every precaution necessary when you're dealing with this kind of money and this significant of a player in your lineup.
I would too.
It's very interesting to me that the Cowboys saw what happened last year when Dak got injured, and they had no answer at quarterback. No Andy Dalton, no Benny DiNucci, Cooper Rush, all trash. And they went in again this year with 2 backup. Their quarterback room probably got worse this year because they don't have Andy Dalton as a backup. They don't have a proven guy as a backup quarterback. That to me, I think will come back and haunt them next year or this year.
Oh
sorry.
yeah.
I will say this about Dak Prescott. I like the guy. He's a great guy. I don't think he's a $40 million a year quarterback. But I think that if he was to be a $40 million a year quarterback, I think that that's a deal that they should have pulled a couple of years ago. I definitely would not invest $40 million a year on a guy that snapped his leg on a third down play, in game 6 of the 2020 NFL season. That's just me. I don't think I'd be investing that kind of money in a guy that's, snap his leg in half, before the season's even halfway done. That was a pretty risky move, I think.
Well, that's Jerry Jones's fault. He should have paid him 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He should have done that contract a couple years ago. I wouldn't pay anybody after a huge injury like that. I mean, that kind of money.
Now we do have a couple of other comments. Now it's not actually related to the topics, but so starting off, John Suggs, he says Ravens run game looked improved when they played the Carolina Panthers last week. Actually, I'll post that score up real quick. Do you? It's preseason though. That's really the thing. The Ravens, their last loss in preseason, as we talked about earlier, was in 2015. They've won like 20 something since then. Now, do you guys have a different opinion on that?
I really don't know how the Ravens run game to really improve, because it seems like that's all they do 80% of the time is run the ball. I don't really see a lot of throwing. Their quarterback runs, their running back runs, whoever picks up their fumbles runs. I mean, it's just, it's just one of those things. They got wide receivers on the team, but to me, it's just a team that has mostly a ground game. So I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see the Ravens kind of air it out a little bit more, but it doesn't seem like they have a great aerial attack.
And the next question, actually, again, all these are from John Suggs, which, by the way, thank you, John, for commenting on the show. Hold on real quick. I'm sorry, I'm posting a banner real quick about some of the score updates. So his next comment, actually, so does Teddy Bridgewater win the starting quarterback battle over Drew Lock? We don't know. I mean, look, I read an article that quoted Vic Fangio. And Vic Fangio said that he doesn't even know at this point who's going to win the starting quarterback battle, because, well, to tell you the truth, even though I'm rooting for Drew Lock over Vic Fangio at this point, over Teddy Bridgewater at this point, I feel like Vic not knowing, even though their talents are very similar, Vic not knowing, I think that does not. I don't think that looks good on him, personally. What are your opinions on that?
I think if Drew Lock doesn't start the season with the Denver Broncos, quarterback that was drafted by Vic Fangio, or I guess drafted by John Elway, I mean, you might as well kiss his ass goodbye. Mm-hmm. Teddy Bridgewater is a great backup quarterback. Great. He's a great guy you want as a backup quarterback. We saw what he did with the Saints. I think he went something like 5-1. I know he had, he was with Minnesota, got drafted, took him to the playoffs, got injured. But that was eons ago. The guy is completely different. We saw what he did in Carolina last year. Granted, he did not have Christian McCaffrey, but, their wide receivers are pretty darn good. And they struggled to a 4-12 record. Great backup quarterback. They need to go with Drew Lock. I mean, Drew Lock was not very impressive last year, but he has a big arm. And, he kind of looks like the stereotypical pocket passing quarterback that you want. And if you look at the analytics, and I've been I don't know why I've been doing a deep dive into Denver Broncos analytics, but the analytics show that Drew Lock should be performing slightly better than what he has performed, and that Teddy Bridgewater has been performing worse than he has been performing. So, with that being said, you got to go with the younger guy. You got to go with Drew Lock.
Yeah, I agree with that. However, I did feel like I said, I feel like I like that Bridgewater started against the Seahawks because it was a preseason game, and I wanted to see what they would do. What he would do if he was put in the starting position. Now I get it; it's not the same. Some of these guys that are playing on the Seattle Seahawks defense probably won't be starting when week 1 happens, right when regular season happens. But I like the fact that Teddy Bridgewater started this week 2. But I agree. I think Drew Lock should be the guy to start for week 1 going on in. And he says, yeah, but trust me, the O-line to protect them, that reminds me of the Bengals front line, what we saw happen to Joe Burrow last year. Going into that, it kind of goes into the debate that we just had talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals, you're right. Quarterbacks, John's right. Quarterbacks do need protection, and that is what Denver has been lacking the past couple of years. Some of those guys are really solid, but not everybody. I say some, maybe 1 or 2. Bengals have been struggling. The Jets have been struggling. Dak obviously was struggling for that last year when talking about Dallas Cowboys, but I don't think it was the right move for the Jaguars this year. I mean, sorry, not the Jaguars, the Jets this year to draft Zach Wilson, even though Zach Wilson is my favorite, is the guy coming from BYU. I know, I'm glad he went to the NFL at that high draft pick that he did, but Zach, I feel like that Oregon Ducks offensive lineman that got drafted into the Detroit Lions, I felt like he could have gone higher, and that the Jets would have done should have got him instead of Wilson.
I completely disagree. I think after Sam Darnold showed nothing as a quarterback for the New York Jets, absolutely nothing. Now, granted, he didn't have the best supporting cast and a complete moron as a head coach, but he showed absolutely nothing. He has no awareness of the pocket. He throws interceptions galore dating back to his USC days, so you can't even say it was like a
Penei Sewell. Thank you, John.
Penei Sewell, yes. Penei Sewell should have went to the Bengals, actually.
Thank you. That's another team.
He should have went to the Bengals to save Joe Burrow's ass. But in terms of your take on Zach Wilson, he's looked, and I don't put too much stock into preseason, but he's looked fantastic in preseason. And he's looked way better than I've ever seen Darnold look ever as a quarterback. So I disagree with you, Nate, a little bit.
Yeah, I think one thing that Zach Wilson brings to the table is that even with not so great wide receivers right now, he can buy time in the pocket. He can throw against his body. He can throw outside the pocket. He's pretty mobile, and he can make some big throws, and he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. If he doesn't hold on to the ball too long, and if he doesn't see anything there, he's not afraid to throw it to the sidelines. So I think that he's one of those quarterbacks that even though he doesn't have a whole lot to work with, I think that he'll get the most out of the talent that's behind him, because he is capable of at least buying some time and making some decent throws, and he's got a strong arm. So I do think that was actually the right pick for the Jets. but I do think that the Bengals should have got a really solid offensive tackle instead of going after a wide receiver in last year's draft. Even though Chase is an excellent receiver, I think that the Bengals had more pressing issues in wide receiver.
Yes, and I get why they drafted him because Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, they did go from the same college. I get that, but
and to talk about the Drew Lock thing, I think that Drew Lock, is a little bit more talented. I think that he's got more of an upside right now than Bridgewater has. But you're talking about the Denver Broncos, Nate. This is your team. This is your team, and I know that they could be very capable of making the playoffs. They've got good talent on both sides of the ball. They just need more adequate quarterback play. So if they can get some more maturity out of Drew Lock, because we know that he's got a decent arm and stuff, he just needs to mature and make some better throws, because they do have a very, very solid up and coming, I think, all-star rotation of receivers. You got Sutton in there, you got Hamler in there, you got plenty of speed. You just need a good quarterback that can make it outside the pocket and make some good throws. That's really all they need, because the wide receiving talent is there and the defensive talent is there.
Yeah, and I've kind of made some bold takes in the past. There's two that I will say about my personal opinion. One is going to hurt more than the other. I feel like the Denver Broncos are going to be the Miami Dolphins of last year, and that is getting double-digit wins but not making the playoffs and being the 8th seed. But the other one that is kind of a bold take for me is the Chiefs and the Chargers and Denver are going to be three teams I think are going to sweep the NFC East this year. Washington, Giants, Eagles, Cowboys, all those teams, they have a lot more questions and answers, especially going down that list, Cowboys and the New York Giants. But going back to my team, yes, I feel like if Drew Lock has a terrible this year, yeah, he needs to go. But he needs more film to study before you can make that decision.
Drew Lock just needs to be average. If Drew Lock is average, the Broncos win 8-9 games. Easy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's average. And that's average.
Yeah, he just needs to make a little bit better decisions. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, he needs to make better decisions. Looking at his 4-1 stretch, mainly because of his 4-1 stretch, the main factor of that was throwing the deep ball to Courtland Sutton. You took away Courtland Sutton, I think, was what caused part of the problem for last year.
Yeah, Mike's right. He just needs to be average. I mean, They won the Super Bowl a few years ago with Peyton Manning, who had like a quarterback rating of like 10. In that game.
So. That's true.
That Peyton Manning couldn't throw 10 yards, I think. I mean, the guy was shot, but their defense was fantastic. And if you're looking at that defense right now, and you know this, Nate, top down, they are stacked.
They are. Yes, they are. And people say this all the time, and I've heard this way too many times. But I've been hearing that you have to have an elite, solid quarterback to win the Super Bowl, and that's obviously not true. I mean, Peyton Manning, as much as he is done throughout his entire career, his last year was terrible. He sucked his last year, and he won the Super Bowl. You look at Joe Flacco, he won the Super Bowl. I mean, Nick Foles, he won the Super Bowl. There's been several times where you've had terrible quarterbacks win Super Bowls.
And I think that with Nick Foles, I think that was probably their best chance. You're talking about a Colts fan over here. I don't know if the Eagles would have won with Carson Wentz. I think that Nick Foles just had one of those exceptional games, and just kind of was able to kind of do what he had to do. I think it would have been a completely different looking game with Carson Wentz in there. So I think that, even though Nick Foles isn't the greatest of quarterbacks, he was an excellent backup, and he was able to do what he needed to do, at least for that Super Bowl.
So let's move on. Let's move on to some of our other topics here. Let's go in and hold on real quick. To go in and talk about actually, let's move away from football and go in and talk a little bit of baseball. The Mets and the Red Sox are two teams and that had really strong starts to their seasons. The Mets do this every year. I get it. But, the Red Sox, both of those teams had really strong starts to their seasons. And as after the All-Star break, things started to go downhill fast. I mean, look at Boston. The Texas Rangers, out of all teams, ended up scoring 10 runs on them. The Texas Rangers, who are second to last in the conference, scored 10 plus runs on the Boston Red Sox. Okay, we did the same thing against the Dodgers, but that's still not the point. You look at the New York Mets, who they started off strong too. But as time goes on, the standings, the New York Mets are currently, I think, second in their division last I checked. No, they're third. They're third now with the record of 61 and 63. But earlier in the season, they were the only team to have a winning record in that division. And the Braves were just completely opposite. Greg, I'll go with you first. What happened?
Well, a lot of this has been kind of happening since day one. Francisco Lindor hasn't lived up. I know he's on year one of his big contract with them, but he hasn't lived up to his contract so far. He hasn't played the greatest of baseball for him, at least not the level that they were expecting and the level of pay that he's getting paid for it. They tried to make some big moves in free agency by picking up Javi Baez. But we've talked about it earlier. Jacob deGrom was lights out. I mean, he was on pace for like a world record shattering ERA. Nobody could hit him. He had more runs batted in than runs gave up, from a pitching standpoint. So, I mean, he was just on fire. And then he's been having some lingering issues. You're not getting very good pitching performances out of Taiwan Taylor. I don't know what's going on. They've had a big glaring hole at third base all season long. So I don't think that this is necessarily something that's coming on. They've had some of these problems from day one with Francisco Lindor just not handling the bat that well this year. They've had a lot of errors at third base. They've had some inconsistencies within their lineup. So I think this is something that kind of started from day one, but we didn't really recognize it because in that division for a while, they were still able to be leaders in that division because the Braves were having problems all over the field for a while. Now the Braves are finally getting things worked out and their pitching staff is starting to come along, and so they're starting to become a big time force now in that division. So I don't know exactly what is going on within the clubhouse, but I just know that they've got some injuries and some, key injuries with deGrom, and then their pitching staff just not coming through. when they need to, and of course they never did pick up that big bat at third base that they needed to. They had a chance to get Chris Bryant and they whiffed on it. So they've just made a ton of errors, from a front office standpoint and from a player development standpoint. So, I'll be honest, I had them winning this division when I heard that, Syndergaard was going to come back, after a month or two, and that they were picking up Taijuan Walker and all these guys, and DeGrom was supposed to be healthy, and after they picked up Lindor, but yeah, they're just not playing very good baseball right now.
I mean, there's no secret that the Mets have started disintegrating right at the point of colliding with Jacob DeGrom missing the season, or I think he's going to miss the season. That's kind of when they started declining. You look at their, like you said, Greg, their moves at the All-Star break, the moves that they didn't make, the moves that they did make. I was actually very impressed with the Javi Baez trade, but guess what? He hasn't been healthy. In fact, he just got activated, I think, either today or yesterday. And they just haven't been able to hit. You look up and down that lineup. They have guys that you look at their past hitting box scores. They look like they are world beaters, but Francisco Lindor hasn't been hitting, and that's their prized possession. So you couple all those things, and I mean, it's no surprise. I mean, at this point in time in August, they're 6-15. Meanwhile, the Braves are riding I think that they've won 16 out of their last 18 games, and the Braves actually went out and made a lot of moves there in the trade deadline that were very impressive, that have added to their team. Getting Soler, they had to get Soler because they lost Acuna for the season, and their starting pitching has just been fantastic. So you couple all that, and Freddie Freeman's came back, started hitting because he struggled during the early part of the season, and man, they're riding the wave, and momentum is a thing, folks. And the Mets right now do not have the momentum. The good thing about the Mets right now, though, is they are going to get Syndergaard back. They just got Baez back. We'll see what happens with DeGrom. The rest of their schedule looks pretty favorable. I think if you look at the rest of their schedule, all their combined winning percentage is under 500, very positive. But I don't know, man. If you can't hit in this league, it's going to be a massive problem for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's really all I have to say. We got close. We got time. We passed that 1 hour mark. We're actually 12 minutes over that 1 hour mark. Greg, any final thoughts before we give this a close?
Yeah, there's one topic that we didn't really hit on. I just wanted to give a shout out to Miguel Miggy Cabrera for hitting his 500th home run. This weekend. That was a big milestone. But with that being said, I would like to see some salary caps going on within Major League Baseball. It just seems like it's the haves and have-nots in this league. It just seems like every trade deadline or every offseason, the Yankees are buying everybody. The Yankees are on fire now. They got every big bat pretty much that was out there, at the trade deadline. But when it comes to Miguel Cabrera, he's a guy that truly loves the game. Had put his heart and soul into the game. He's 38 years old. He still has a year or two left on his huge contract. And I think that it's time for people in the front office of baseball to start looking into paying players earlier in their career. I think that when you look at the Albert Pujolses and the Miguel Cabreras that are getting, $30 million when they're 38, 39, 40 years old, I think that's a little bit ridiculous when you look at their numbers, because they're definitely, at least those two guys' productions don't really merit that kind of a contract. Miguel Cabrera has 500 home runs, for his career, but he's only got 12 or 13 this season, but he's getting, almost $40 million, for this year. And it's kind of lackluster numbers in comparison to what we've seen 5 to 7 years ago. And his batting average is well below 300 and everything else. And not to take anything away from him, but I think that when you look at a Fernando Tatis who got a huge deal, before he was 22 years old, a huge contract extension, I think that's what Major League Baseball needs to look at. I think that some of these guys that are signing these mega contracts when they're 30 years old, I think that's a little bit too late in the game to be signing these massive contracts. I think that it's time to start paying these players early when they're in their prime and being able to be more productive. That's just my final thought. I don't know what you guys think about that kind of stuff, but
yeah, I think Miguel Cabrera, in an era of PD use, I don't think I've ever heard PED use associated with his name. I remember him coming up in about 2003, roughly. He was on that Florida Marlins team with Mike Lowell there at third base. AJ Burnett pitching there. They had Beckett. They beat that Yankee team in 2003, and he was a young gun there. He was fantastic to watch. And, like you said, he got that big contract, and he – the last 3 years he's kind of been a below replacement level player, which is kind of terrible. And the Tigers are just waiting for that contract, or they could just Chris Davis him and tell him to go away, whatever they want.
Yeah,
whatever that. But
they're in the middle of a huge rebuild, and it's kind of hard to rebuild when you got a guy that's 38 eating up $40 million of contract space. So I don't know. I don't know if they can move on from it
though. Bobby Bonilla.
Well, the Angels moved on from Pujols, but Pujols was on the last year of his deal, so a slightly different scenario.
Yeah.
It's my final thoughts. Happy birthday or late birthday. I'm not really sure. I think it is his birthday. Kobe Bryant. Rest in peace. Terrible thing that happened a year and a half ago. And then also my other last final thoughts. Stay tuned for Sunday. And this has been Nate the Great, Angry Degenerate, and Greg the Keg Gallino signing out. See you guys next week.